When Luka Modric headed in his 83rd minute winner today, I mean, the cameras instantly zoomed in on the pitch, right?
Oh, absolutely. The broadcast loves those moments.
Totally. You see the sweat, the tactics, the sheer exhaustion of a 40-year-old maestro securing this crucial win for Croatia in Group L. But what you don't see on the broadcast is that, well, half the battle wasn't happening on the grass at all.
Right, it's completely out of frame.
Exactly. It was happening 100 feet in the air, up in the press box. Because the people actively shaping your reality of the sports you love, they are fighting a completely invisible structural war of their own. So welcome to another deep dive where we are going to explore both sides of that stadium today.
And we have a really fascinating stack of sources to help us do that. To break down the action on the pitch, we've got fresh match reports and data from SofaScore, The Guardian, and CBS covering today's massive 2026 World Cup Group L climax.
Which was just a phenomenal match.
It really was. And then, to understand what is happening up in that press box, we are looking at a revealing 2024 academic study from Cogitatio Press. It's by researchers H. Radman and Anna Satra, and it dives deep into the daily, honestly, often shocking realities faced by female sports journalists.
Yeah, we're going to figure out exactly how a game like today's gets played and then how it gets written. And you really have to understand the high-stakes pressure cooker of the pitch before you can understand the pressure cooker of the media covering it.
For sure. The two environments are deeply connected.
So let's drop right into Philadelphia, the conclusion of Group L. Going into this match, the vibes around the Ghanaian national team were absolutely immaculate.
Oh, they had every reason to be confident. They opened with that really gritty, hard-fought 0-0 draw against a heavily favored England side.
A huge result for them.
Yeah, and then they followed it up with a cinematic 1-0 win over Panama.
Yeah.
I mean, all thanks to Caleb Urenki's 95th minute winner.
Man, that goal just broke the internet. You had massive Ghanaian music stars, guys like Shadawala and Stoneboy, immediately celebrating online, dropping tracks. The momentum was just huge.
It was this massive cultural wave.
But, it felt like all that cultural energy was kind of papering over a really massive structural crack in their lineup because they lost their star attacker, Mohamed Kudus, to a quad injury right before the tournament started.
Which is pretty much the worst-case scenario for their offense.
Right. Up until today, they had managed to survive without him. But against Croatia, that missing piece became a gaping hole.
It really did. I mean, the first half was just a tactical masterclass and suffocation by Croatia. The SofaScore data shows Croatia holding an 82% passing accuracy in the final third.
Wow, 82% in the final third?
Yeah. When a team operates with that level of precision in your defensive zone during a World Cup match, they are essentially starving you of oxygen. They just never give you a moment to reset your defensive shape.
And that relentless pressure eventually broke Ghana.
Right.
In the 31st minute.
Exactly. Mateo Kovacic found just a sliver of space, threaded a really neat assist, and Petar Sucic sliced through to score.
What I really want to understand is how a team like Ghana, who possesses genuine talent, gets completely neutralized offensively. I was looking at their expected goals, their XG at halftime, and it was 0.02.
Yeah, that is staggeringly low.
That isn't even a missed opportunity. That is essentially just someone taking a desperate, hopeful swing at the ball from 40 yards out because they have literally no other options. But Thomas Partey was playing well in the midfield, wasn't he?
He was. The data says he completed 53 of his 56 passes.
Right, but every time Ghana tried to move forward, it felt like they were running into a brick wall. Ghana's tactical approach was like a coiled spring, absorbing massive pressure until they snapped back on a counter. But Croatia's midfield was like water, just patiently flowing around and eventually eroding those defenses.
That is a great way to put it.
So, with Ghana performing this well generally, how did the absence of Mohamed Kudus fundamentally alter their offensive ceiling in this group stage?
Well, the physical reality on the pitch shows why those passes from Partey weren't translating into danger. He was recycling the ball beautifully in the middle third of the pitch. But without a player who can physically break the defensive lines, possession is toothless.
It just doesn't go anywhere.
Exactly. Ghana managed to reach the final third 24 times, but their success rate in those phases dropped to 67%.
Yeah.
Antoine Semenyo was completely isolated up top. He was making runs, but there was no one to connect the midfield to the attack.
So this is where the absence of Kudus fundamentally changes the geometry of the field, because Kudus isn't just a guy who hangs around the penalty box waiting to shoot.
Not at all. He is the player who can take a pass while surrounded by 3 defenders, physically hold them off, spin and sprint 40 yards to drag the entire team out of their own half.
And without that specific threat, the Croatian midfielders didn't have to respect the counterattack. They could just step 5 or 10 yards higher up the pitch and literally squeeze the life out of Ghana.
Spot on.
Hmm.
When you remove a player with that kind of transitional gravity, the opposing defense comfortably compresses the playing area. But, to their credit, Ghana's resilience is really notable.
Oh, they definitely didn't roll over.
No, they completely shifted their strategy in the second half. They leaned heavily into their physical advantages and ended up winning 80% of their aerial duels in this match. And that aerial dominance paid off in the 73rd minute.
It was a stunning moment. Derek Lucassen gets on the end of a set piece and volleys home the equalizer.
Such a crucial goal.
And by the way, just a fun bit of family trivia for you. He is the brother of Brian Brobby, who is currently starring for the Netherlands. But yeah, out of nowhere, it's 1-1. Ghana is back in it.
Capitalizing on a set piece is exactly how a team under pressure stays alive. The problem is, when you are playing a team marshaled by a player like Luka Modric, any lapse in concentration over the remaining 20 minutes is just fatal.
And Modric makes them pay. The man is 40 years old, playing his historic 200th cap for the Croatian national team, and he still has the vision to perfectly set up Nikola Vlasic for a brilliant header in the 83rd minute.
An unbelievable assist.
2-1 Croatia. That is the final whistle. Meanwhile, over in New Jersey, England takes care of business against Panama, winning 2-0 with goals from Jude Bellingham and Harry Kane. So, England tops Group L with 7 points. Croatia takes second with 6, and Ghana finishes third with 4 points.
Which is really interesting because under the old tournament rules, 4 points in a third-place finish would mean packing your bags.
Yep, tournament over.
But in this expanded 48-team format, 4 points is highly likely to see Ghana advance the round of 32 as one of the best third-place teams. They live to fight another day.
It's wild to think that the instant Vlasic's header across the goal line, that entire narrative, Ghana's tactical struggles, Modric's legacy, the implications of a 48-team format, was already being typed out, debated, and packaged by hundreds of people sitting in the press box above the pitch.
And the battles those journalists fight just to sit in those seats are incredibly intense.
Right, which brings us to the second half of our deep dive.
Yeah, the 2024 study by Age Radman and Anna Setra real keels back the curtain on this. They conducted deep, semi-structured interviews with 10 of the most prominent female sports journalists in Sweden.
Okay.
And to analyze what these women experience daily, the researchers utilized 2 specific sociological frameworks: the binary gender system and the concept of hegemonic masculinity.
Okay, let's unpack that. I want to break down hegemonic masculinity so it doesn't just sound like a dusty textbook definition.
Good idea.
In a sports newsroom, this isn't just about men literally holding the executive jobs. It's the idea that the default setting for a sports expert, like how they speak, what they value, the whole tone of their coverage, is unconsciously coded as masculine.
Exactly. The entire culture is built around a male standard. And women entering that space are constantly forced to navigate an environment that was never actually designed to include them.
The historical context the study provides makes this starkly clear, even in Sweden, which is usually globally recognized as a pioneer in gender equality.
Yeah, the researchers point out that the first female sports anchor on Swedish public television, Ann-Britt Ride Pedersen, wasn't appointed until 1980.
1980? That really isn't that long ago.
Not at all. And this was an era where the culture was so exclusionary that women were officially banned from even competing in the Vasaloppet, which is the world's largest public cross-country ski race. So the presence of women analyzing sports is an incredibly recent phenomenon.
Oh, the journalists interviewed did point out that things look different today. There are physically more women in the newsrooms.
That's true.
They mentioned that editorial staffs are more supportive now, and they finally have managers who recognize the sheer vulnerability of sending a female reporter into a crowd of thousands of drunk, aggressive, highly tribal football fans.
Right. The traditional broadcast and print institutions have implemented professional standards, human resources departments, and quotas. The environment within those legacy structures has definitely improved.
Okay, wait, I have to stop you there. If the traditional newsrooms are actually hiring more women and the bosses are actively stepping in to protect their staff on the field, hasn't the glass ceiling effectively been broken? Why does this study argue that the more things change, the more they stay the same?
Because the sports media landscape didn't just stay in those traditional newsrooms, it fractured.
Ah, right.
The researchers identify a deeply insidious phenomenon they call the new media backlash. Just as women began securing prominent roles on television broadcasts and in major newspapers, the industry exploded into podcasts, YouTube channels, independent blogs, and live betting streams.
And that space operates entirely differently. It's like a digital Wild West where the sheriffs, the HR departments, and the broadcast regulators have absolutely no jurisdiction.
Exactly. The researchers describe the culture of this new frontier as guys on the couch. It's highly informal, heavily opinionated, intimately tied to the gambling industry, and aggressively male-dominated.
Wow.
This unregulated space acts as a massive collective backlash against the professionalization of traditional media. It quietly and effectively pushes women right back out of the newest, most lucrative, and most culturally relevant spaces in sports journalism.
So it's like moving the goalposts mid-game. Just as women finally gain access to the main stadium of traditional media, a brand new, exclusive VIP lounge of podcasts and live betting opens up next door.
And the old boys club mentality is guarding the door all over again.
That is exactly what's happening. It really is an invisible barrier. You see women anchoring the formal pregame show on a major network, but the multi-million-dollar podcast network breaking down the tactics later that night is entirely composed of men.
That's such a striking contrast. And even within the spaces where women have gained a foothold, the performance standards are wildly unequal. The study notes that female journalists feel they have to be, and I quote, so damn much better than a man just to survive a broadcast.
Right. The tolerance for error is practically non-existent. Like, if a male journalist mispronounces a complicated surname or mixes up a statistic, the audience assumes he misspoke.
Yeah, it's just a slip of the tongue.
But if a female journalist makes the exact same error, the mistake is immediately weaponized. The audience reaction isn't that she misspoke. The reaction is that women inherently do not understand sports. Her single error is used to invalidate the competence of her entire gender.
It's exhausting. You are carrying the weight of half the human race every time the red light goes on. You aren't just a reporter, you are a representative.
And if the daily psychological weight of that isn't enough, the study dives into the motherhood penalty, which fundamentally alters career trajectories.
Yes, the networking mechanisms of sports journalism, like the late-night post-match drinks, the constant weekend travel, the expectation of unbound availability, those are functional for young single professionals.
Right.
But the structures of the industry have steadfastly refused to adapt to accommodate working mothers. The culture is described as fun when women are young, but the moment children enter the picture, the structural differences between male and female career paths become a chasm. Fathers in the industry rarely face the same implicit demands to step back, while incredibly talented women are quietly forced out because the system demands an unsustainable lifestyle.
And we, as the audience, are the ones who ultimately pay for that. We lose their analysis. We lose the perspective of a seasoned journalist who could have broken down that Croatian midfield masterclass today simply because the industry wouldn't accommodate a flexible schedule.
It's a huge loss for the sport. And for the women who do manage to stay and navigate this environment, the strategies they use to survive the digital vitriol are just intense.
The level of harassment is highly dependent on the sport being covered, isn't it?
Remarkably so. The study highlights that journalists covering figure skating or equestrian sports operate in an environment that is practically free of harassment.
Interesting.
However, the moment a woman steps into the press box of a highly tribal, male-dominated sport, specifically covering the top Swedish men's football league, the Allsvenskan, the digital abuse, becomes intense, personalized, and often explicitly violent.
The ways these women try to manage that psychological war zone are incredibly varied. Some of the journalists talked about killing them with kindness. Like, they will reply to a horrific misogynistic message with a polite, measured inquiry.
And surprisingly, forcing the troll to realize there is a human being on the other side of the screen often causes them to immediately back down and apologize.
Which is wild. And others refuse to absorb the abuse privately. They publicly retweet and expose their harassers to their entire audience.
But those are just the proactive strategies. The defensive measures reveal the true severity of the environment. The researchers documented women utilizing secret, unlisted phone numbers just to avoid constant harassment.
I can't even imagine.
In the most extreme cases, female journalists have legally changed their children's last names to ensure angry fans cannot track their kids down online.
Wait, really? Changing your child's legal name because you reported on a football match? That is a reality that is completely invisible to the average fan reading a post-game recap.
Completely invisible.
And yet, one of the most fascinating layers of this entire study is the generational divide in how this environment is perceived. You have younger journalists vividly describing this violent digital landscape, but the older generation, the trailblazers who broke into the industry decades ago, often reported experiencing far less harassment, with some even claiming they never felt discriminated against at all.
The researchers highlight a highly specific anecdote to illustrate this generational phenomenon. One of the veteran journalists discussed her early days on television. For years, the network's wardrobe department would simply give her men's blazers to wear on air.
Wait, like actual men's jacket?
Yes, she was literally handed a male reporter's jacket, specifically James Funlund's old jacket, and told to put it on. She broadcasted in bright yellow men's jackets, burgundy men's jackets.
Oh my goodness.
It didn't occur to her until years later that she could simply ask management to purchase a blazer actually cut for a woman.
She recounted that story as a quirky, funny memory of the old days, not as a profound example of systemic marginalization. Which leads me to a really deep question about the psychology of that era. Is the older generation's lack of reported discrimination proof that things used to be more polite? Or is it actually a psychological survival mechanism, like a necessary blindness to that hegemonic masculinity, just so they could get through their workday?
The sociological framework strongly suggests it was a survival mechanism. Hegemonic masculinity is most effective when the hierarchy is simply accepted as the natural order of things. For that pioneer generation to survive and do the work they loved, they had to adopt a willful blindness to the discrimination.
They just assimilated into the masculine norm.
Exactly. They viewed themselves strictly as individual journalists, rather than as women in a man's world, which allowed them to focus on the sports rather than the structures.
You just put your head down and do the work.
Right. But the younger generation coming into these newsrooms today is armed with a completely different vocabulary. They are fluent in modern feminism. They see the structural inequalities immediately, and they are refusing to just put on the men's blazer and quietly assimilate.
They're pushing back.
Yes. When you demand space in a traditionally male environment explicitly as a woman, rather than trying to blend in as one of the guys, the friction increases exponentially. The fierce, concentrated digital backlash the younger generation faces is a direct result of them challenging the fundamental culture of the space, rather than just occupying a seat within it.
The door to the newsroom may be open, but the institution inside that door is still deeply resistant to changing its identity. It really gives an entirely new weight to the sports media we consume every single day.
It absolutely brings everything full circle.
Today, we watched a brilliant, high-stakes, tactical chess match. We saw Derek Lucason's heart-stopping volley for Ghana, and we saw Luka Modric conjure a moment of pure, decisive magic for Croatia. We process these 90 minutes as pure entertainment.
But the narrative we receive, the specific statistics that are highlighted, the tactical questions that are asked in the press conference, the storylines that get amplified on the biggest podcasts, is entirely filtered through an ecosystem that is actively fighting its own internal structural battles.
Exactly. The pitch might be a perfectly level playing field, but the press box hovering above it is still built on a steep incline.
So every time you read a match report or listen to a sports podcast breakdown, it is worth remembering the complex human dynamics and historical barriers that are actively shaping whose voice gets to deliver that information to you.
Which leaves us with a really powerful question for you to ponder. As the 2026 World Cup embraces its most expansive global format ever, with 48 teams democratizing access for nations around the world like never before, how long will it take for the media ecosystems covering these events to truly democratize access for the voices reporting on them, without forcing anyone to wear the proverbial men's blazer just to fit in?